Subscribe for more Templar mysteries. The investigation began where the police left off, with a single item that had no inventory tag and did not belong to the museum. It was a bill of lading. A carbon copy, the paper thin and crisp, smelling of dust and something older, ozone, maybe, or cold salt. Edward Reid held it under the desk lamp in the dead curator's office. The room was a capsule of quiet panic, the kind that sets in after a slow, professional unraveling. Books stood at precise attention on metal shelves. Framed prints of medieval manuscripts hung straight on the walls. But the wastebasket was overflowing, the desk blotter stained with overlapping coffee rings, and a single, empty prescription bottle lay on its side by the telephone. The printed text on the bill was from another century, a shipping company long dissolved, a vessel named the Morning Star, a port of call that was now a row of waterfront condominiums. The description was terse, 1 cylinder. Property of the Golden Dawn Society. Conveyance per repository agreement. The date was 1929. The destination was the active commercial port. Today. Edward thumb traced the edge of the paper. No curator's notes, no accession number. Just this one sheet, slipped between pages of a donor ledger like a bookmark for a debt. The police had called it a suicide. The empty bottle, the locked door from the inside, the note about overwhelming stress. It was clean. Too clean. A story assembled from approved parts. He folded the bill of lading into his worn leather notebook. The museum's archive was closed. The real one, he knew, began at the waterfront. The port at night was a cathedral of shadows and sodium light. Chain-link fences sang a low, metallic tune in the wind off the sea. Edward kept to the perimeter, his breath pluming in the damp, cold air that smelled of diesel, rotting fish, and wet concrete. The address on the bill led him to a long, low building of corrugated steel, its sign bleached pale, Templars Holdings and Logistics. It hunched between two massive gantry cranes like a forgotten shed. A side door's latch was green with corrosion. It yielded to firm pressure and a soft, grinding click that sounded far too loud. Inside, the air was a different kind of cold, still and dry, heavy with the smell of machine oil and aged wood. His flashlight beam cut a stark white tunnel through the blackness, painting shelves, crates, and shrink-wrapped pallets in sudden, fleeting relief. He moved with the quiet, deliberate pace of a man used to reading spaces not meant for him. The system was simple, military in its logic, alphanumeric code stenciled on the floor, zones marked by colored lines, lot numbers on tags. He followed the trail to Zone 7. The cylinder was not on a shelf. It stood alone in a cordoned-off area, a space defined by faded yellow paint on the concrete. A sign was stenciled on the floor in bold, black letters, to waiting processing for liquidation. It was longer than a man is tall, and thicker than a barrel. The metal was a dull, non-reflective grey, like old pewter, pitted with age and scuffed from centuries of travel. Edward approached slowly, the beam of his light trembling slightly. He placed a bare hand on its surface. It was cold, a deep, marrow cold, but beneath that was a tremor. A low-frequency vibration, subtle but undeniable, like a generator running deep underground, felt more in the bones than heard. He leaned closer. The flashlight revealed symbols stamped into the metal, not welded or engraved, but seemingly pressed into the material itself, a cross with splayed arms, a rose with 5 distinct petals, a sequence of numerals in the old Roman style. As the light slid over them, the groove seemed to shift for a fraction of a second, like the teeth of gears not quite meshing, an optical trick born of fatigue and shadow. He pulled out his phone to take a picture, to pin this unreality down. The screen flared with a blinding white static, then went black as a stone. The flashlight in his other hand flickered, dimmed, then rallied weakly. A step echoed in the vast silence behind him. Not the scuff of a shoe, but the definitive press of a sole on concrete. Edward turned, his heart a hard, sudden drum against his ribs. The figure stood at the very edge of his light's reach, a silhouette in a long, dark coat that fell straight to the floor. No face was visible under the deep hood, only a suggestion of shadow. "This is not your cargo, Mr. Reid." The voice was flat. Toneless. A voice synthesized for announcing departures or giving directives that were not requests. Step away from the procedure. The man in black moved with an unnerving, liquid economy. He did not rush, he simply occupied the space between Edward and the rattling service door, his movement more like a door sliding shut than a step. Edward backed up until his shoulder brushed the cold cylinder. The contact sent a fresh jolt of that subsonic hum up his spine. Procedure for what? Edward's own voice sounded too loud, too human in the metallic silence. The chain of custody is disturbed. You are not the consignee. Who is? The consignee is deceased. The asset reverts to the custodian. You are an interference. The words carried no malice, only the sterile weight of fact. A metallic screech, raw and violent, ripped through the warehouse. From behind a tower of wooden crates, a yellow forklift rumbled into view, its headlights two blinding suns in the gloom. At the wheel was a woman in a grease-stained parka, her dark hair tied back in a severe, practical tail. Her face was all sharp angles and focused fury. Get on or get run over, sure man, she yelled, her voice raw from salt and shouting. Edward did not hesitate. He vaulted onto the side of the lift, his fingers scrambling for purchase on the cold metal cage. The woman, the captain, wrenched the steering wheel. The forklift lurched forward with a diesel roar, its tines aimed low, not to impale but to sweep. The man in black sidestepped with fluid, almost dismissive ease, but the maneuver forced him back a pace. The lift swung in a wide, grinding arc, heading for a rolling service door. The cylinder? Edward shouted over the engine. Forget it. It cursed. No. Against every screaming instinct, Edward jumped off the moving lift. He hit the concrete hard, rolled, and came up sprinting back toward the cordon area. The man in black was already turning, a dark shape flowing toward him with unsettling speed. Edward grabbed the cylinder. It was unbelievably heavy, its density all wrong. He threw his weight against it, using its own mass to tip it onto its curved side. It began to roll with a strange, hollow rumble that echoed in the cavernous space. The forklift screeched to a halt, reversed with a beeping alarm. The captain swore violently in a language Edward did not know, her words sharp as cracked glass. The fork slid under the rolling cylinder just as the man in black reached them. He did not try to grab it. He stopped, observing, a statue of tailored shadow. You have chosen participation, the flat voice stated, cutting through the mechanical din. Consequences will follow protocol. The forklift surged forward, crashing through the flimsy plastic service door and out into the damp, open night. Edward clung to the frame, the cold wind whipping at his clothes, the mysterious cylinder cradled on the forks before him like some pagan idol on a bier. They did not stop until they were back at the docks, beside a weathered coastal freighter that listed slightly in the oily water. The name on the rust-streaked hull was Morning Star. The captain killed the engine. The sudden silence was broken only by their ragged breathing and the distant, mournful hum of the port. Alice Vargas, she said, not offering a hand. She lit a cigarette, the match flare illuminating eyes that had seen too many night runs and dodged too many questions. That's my ship. And you just made my life a permanent target. Edward Reid. Why did you help? I did not help you. She jerked her chin toward the cylinder, now resting on the slick, weathered boards of the dock. I wem the last link. He paid me. Not for the delivery. For the waiting. Said it was a debt. A 700-year-old debt, finally coming due. She fished a folded paper from her parka pocket, a duplicate of his bill of lading. In the margin, in the dead curator's neat, scholarly hand, it read, to be received in person. Debt must be repaid. Headlights speared the darkness from the shore side, cutting through the mist. Two black SUVs, windows tinted to opacity, pulled onto the wharf, blocking the only exit. Company, Vargas hissed, dropping the cigarette and crushing it under her boot. They were not police. The doors opened silently, and 4 men in dark, tactical-style workwear stepped out. They moved with a coordinated, purposeful grace, no words exchanged. 2 moved directly toward the cylinder. 2 angled toward Edward and Vargas. "Get it aboard!" Vargas shoved Edward toward the sagging gangplank. She snatched a heavy, rust-spotted wrench from a deck box, hefting its weight. The first man reached the cylinder. Edward put himself in the way. This was not a fight for victory, it was a fight for possession, a brutal, shoving match over an inert object. The man grabbed for Edward's jacket. Edward twisted, using the man's momentum to slam him against the cold metal of the cylinder. The impact reverberated with a deep, unsettling bong that seemed to hang in the air. Vargas was tangling with the second man near the ship's rail. She was smaller but moved with a feral, pragmatic fury, using the wrench not to strike, but to block, parry, and keep him at bay, a defensive brawl to hold ground. The first man recovered, swinging a heavy fist. Edward ducked, the air whistling past his ear. He saw his chance, a coil of thick, tarred rope on a rusted winch drum. He yanked it, sending a loose end whipping across the man's path. The man stumbled, caught off balance. Edward did not strike. He shoved the man hard, sending him sprawling backwards into a stacked pile of frayed cargo netting. Vargas, seeing her opponent distracted by the commotion, swept his legs out from under him with a sharp kick. He fell hard on the wet dock with a grunt. "Now," she yelled, her voice cracking. Together, breathing hard, they manhandled the impossibly heavy cylinder up the groaning gangplank, rolling it with frantic heaves into the dim, cave-like hold of the Morning Star. The hold smelled of damp wood, fuel, and decades of carried cargo, spices, machine parts, despair. Vargas slammed the heavy iron hatch shut and threw a corroded bolt the size of her forearm. They stood in the sudden, pressurized quiet, the only light a single, fly-speck bulb swinging gently from a wire. They had the artifact. They were trapped. Edward's phone, which he dropped onto the cylinder during the struggle, lit up. The screen glowed with an eerie, internal light, then the dialer app opened by itself, calling a number. It rang once. Edward picked it up, his palm slick with sweat. A woman's voice, calm and clear as a lecturer's, came through. It held no warmth, only a precise, analytical interest. "Edward Reid. Congratulations on a successful extraction. You demonstrated unexpected efficacy. I am Joan Carter. Let us meet. We have overlapping interests." Joan Carter met them in a disused office on the second floor of a defunct import-export firm, a space Vargas knew and, apparently, occasionally used. It was a time capsule of 70s corporate decay. Mustard yellow linoleum curled at the edges. A water-stained ceiling tile had collapsed in one corner, exposing gnawed electrical wires. Metal desks were piled with mildewed ledgers and dead telephones. Carter arrived alone, a stark anomaly in the gloom. Her coat was charcoal wool, tailored and sharp. She wore leather gloves, which she did not remove. Her gaze went past them, past the grime, and locked onto the cylinder leaning in a shadowed corner like an uninvited guest. "You are operating under a fundamental misapprehension of your role," she began, dispensing with greetings. Her voice was cool, dry, filling the stale air. The late curator was the final designated recipient under the terms of an old compact. His death was an administrative flaw. A skipped step in a very long procedure. She stepped closer to the cylinder, her eye scanning its surface with a scholar's hunger. "This is not a treasure. It is a receipt. Proof of settlement for a very old debt." "A debt to whom?" Edward asked, his own voice level, matching her clinical tone. "To the continuity itself. To the line of succession. Asterisk paupers Camillatones Christi Star. The debt was sealed, the collateral placed into ritual transit. Its arrival here, now, signals the appointed time for accounting." She spoke not of magic, but of logistics, of vaults within vaults, of transfers codified in blood and later in law, of agreements that slept in archives until their terms were met. Vargas leaned against a rotting doorframe, arms crossed over her parka. "So it's a bomb? Some kind of curse?" "It is a trigger," Carter corrected, a hint of impatience in her precision. Its opening is not an act of theft. It is an acknowledgement of liability. A signature on a dotted line that has been waiting for centuries. And then the terms of the payment become enforceable. Edward walked to the cylinder, the old floorboards creaking under his weight. In the grey, soupy light filtering through the filthy windows, he saw more detail. He pulled a bandana from his pocket, spat on it discreetly, and rubbed at a patch of grime near the cylinder's base. The pitted metal gave way not to more symbols, but to a series of thin, parallel lines and spaces of mathematical regularity. A barcode. An old-fashioned, linear code 3-9 pattern. He'd seen them on library books from the 70s, on boxes in government surplus stores. This is here, he said, more to himself. Carter was at his side in an instant, her clinical detachment forgotten. She bent down, her breath catching audibly. That is a profound anomaly. That symbology was not invented when this vessel was forged. It is temporally impossible. But it's here. She stared, her gloved finger hovering an inch above the lines, not daring to touch. It is a message. A prophecy articulated in the form of a technological anachronism. Her eyes, when she looked up at Edward, were alight with a cold, terrifying hunger. It is a key. A rock, wrapped in grimy paper, suddenly crashed through the already cracked window, landing with a thud on a desk. Edward unfolded the paper. Block letters, written with a thick marker, * Warehouse B, Hangar 3. 1 hour. Come alone. * beneath the words, a crude but recognizable sketch of a rose. He does not mean me, Carter said, her lip curling slightly in distaste. My involvement is the complication. They want the variable removed. ****** Warehouse B was a cathedral of rust and decay, a vast iron shell where silence had congealed into something solid. The usual port soundtrack, the shriek of gulls, the distant thump of machinery, the lap of water, was absent, utterly swallowed by the cavernous space. Their own footsteps on the grit-strewn concrete echoed like trespasses. On the far wall, drawn in fresh, white chalk, was a perfect replica of the barcode from the cylinder. Next to it, the same rose from the note. Shadows detached from deeper shadows. Not just the man in black. Two others, identical in their long coats and featureless obscurity, formed a loose triangle around them, cutting off the paths to the side doors. You have been warned, the central figure intoned, the mechanically flat voice unmistakable. You disrupt the procedure. The asset must be sanitized. We just want to understand what it is, Edward said, playing for time, his eyes darting across the arena of scrap metal and forgotten machinery. Understanding is not required. Compliance is. The figure on the right moved. Fast. Not a punch, but a grab aimed at Edward's forearm, a technique meant to control and subdue with minimal fuss. Edward jerked his arm back. Varga shouted, her voice raw, and shoved a listing metal drum filled with concrete slag into the path of the advancing second operative. The fight was not for possession, but for escape, a panicked, scrambling flight through a rusted labyrinth. The operatives were methodical, herding them, their movements eerily coordinated. Edward and Varga split up, instinct taking over. Edward was chased onto a skeletal gantry high above the floor, his boots ringing on the perforated steel. His pursuer was silent, relentless, a shadow with purpose. Edward kicked a loose section of pipe. It clattered down, bouncing off the gantry with a deafening series of clangs, forcing the man to dodge. Edward used the second of distraction to scramble down a ladder, the cold, greasy rungs burning his palms, and landed in a forest of dormant lathes and press brakes. He could hear Vargas, not far away, breathing hard, the distinctive clang of metal on metal, her wrench against something. He moved toward the sound, ducking under conveyors, his heart hammering against his ribs. He saw her, backed into a dead end formed by two massive shipping containers. The third operative had her cornered. She held the length of rebar she'd grabbed like a baseball bat, her knuckles white. As the operative reached for her with that same efficient grab, Edward slammed into him from the side. They fell in a tangle of limbs onto the cold concrete. The operative was strong, his body like coiled cable. One arm snaked around Edward's neck, applying pressure not to choke, but to lock, to immobilize. Edward could not breathe, could not break the grip. Black spots danced at the edge of his vision. Then Vargas's rebar came down, not on the man's head, but on a rusted pressure valve mounted on the wall next to them. The deafening, gong-like clang and the subsequent spray of foul-smelling, stagnant water directly into the operative's face shocked his system. His grip spasmed and loosened. Gasping, Edward scrambled free. He and Vargas were up and running, slipping, stumbling, bursting out a side door into the blessedly noisy, wet, and real evening, leaving the echoing, sterile silence of the hangar behind. Back at the derelict office, breathless and bleeding from minor scrapes, Carter was waiting. She was furious, a cold, contained rage that made the room feel several degrees colder. "You led them right to the operational principle," she accused, her voice like ice cracking. "They are the operational principle," Edward shot back, wiping grit from his face. "Who are they?" "The custodians. The ones who ensure certain sleepers remain asleep and certain ledgers remain balanced in perpetuity." She turned her glare to the cylinder, which seemed to hum faintly in the dim room. "The barcode. It's not just a date or an identifier. It is an access cipher. It means the debt is not merely historical. It's live. Operational. Waiting for the correct reader to execute its terms." The single functioning streetlight outside the window flickered, dimmed, and died with a faint pop star. Then the next one down the narrow access road followed. And the next, a wave of darkness marching with deliberate, unsettling pace toward their building. "They recutting the grid," Vargas whispered, her face pale in the fading twilight. Carter's expression shifted from anger to something graver. She looked, for the first time, genuinely unsettled. "They not trying to retrieve it anymore. They are creating a sterile field. An environment where only the procedure can exist, uncontaminated." She turned to Edward, her earlier fury gone, replaced by a grim, absolute certainty. "You still think there rests something inside that cylinder?" "There is not. The cylinder is the instrument of the debt. Opening it is the signature. And the payment," she trailed off, her eyes distant, "the payment could be anything. A service. A lifetime of silence. A life." Darkness, thick and complete, owned the building. They worked by the frantic, jumping light of Vargas's wind-up emergency lantern, casting monstrous, swaying shadows on the walls. The cylinder stood in the center of the room, an alien obelisk in a pool of weak, jaundiced light. Vargas, against all apparent sense, pressed her ear directly to the cold metal. She closed her eyes, concentrating. Her breath stilled. "It's not humming anymore," she said, her voice strained. "It's ticking. Like a clock. A big, slow clock." As if on cue, headlight beams swept across the boarded-up windows, slicing through the cracks and lighting up the swirling dust motes like frantic stars. The sound of car engines idling, multiple ones, came from the front and the alley behind. They were surrounded, sealed in. "We cannot stay here," Carter stated, her voice regaining its surgical calm. "My laboratory. At the university. It has shielding, specialized tools. It is the only place where we might perform a controlled reading of the cipher before they breach." "A reading?" Edward asked, his mind racing over the word breach. "A neutral opening. To decrypt the terms of the debt without formally activating the collection mechanism. It is our only chance to see the shape of the trap before it springs." It was a desperate, naked gamble. Under the cover of the unnatural darkness, they loaded the cylinder onto a heavy-duty hand truck Vargas produced from a closet. They moved through the back alleys like a ragged funeral procession, the cylinder's uneven wheels rumbling over broken asphalt, the only sound in the artificially quieted port district. Carter's lab was in a sub-basement of the university's history department, accessed through a service entrance that smelled of old steam pipes and floor wax. The room itself was a stark hybrid. One wall was covered in high-resolution spectral analysis charts and fluid dynamics diagrams, the other held framed woodcuts of alchemical laboratories and monastic scriptoria. In the center stood a heavy steel table, bolted to the floor, surrounded by clamps, articulated arms, and a laser scanner linked to a silent, powerful computer bank. Carter worked with feverish, precise movements, aligning the cylinder in the clamps, connecting fiber optic leads to a wand-like device. "The barcode is the key," she murmured, more to herself than to them. "It will tell us the routing number of the debt. The ultimate beneficiary." Outside the lab's heavy, vault-like door, they heard footsteps. Not running. Measured. Unhurried. Coming down the concrete stairs with a terrible, deliberate rhythm. "Hurry," Vargas breathed, her hand finding the pin of a large, red fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. Carter initiated the scan. A thin red line of light traveled down the length of the barcode with a soft, rising whine. The computer screen filled with cascading streams of data, glyphs, numbers spelled out as words, geometric patterns. Then it all resolved, coalescing into a single line of text rendered in a crisp, serifed font that looked centuries old, *pactum consummatum ist. The door opened. The man in black stood on the threshold, not breathing hard. His two operatives flanked the hallway behind him, still as statues. His hooded gaze swept past them, rested on the glowing screen, then on the cylinder. "The procedure is complete," he said. There was no triumph, no relief. It was a statement of fact, as neutral as a weather report. "You read too late," Carter spat, though her defiance sounded hollow in the sterile room. "We've read it. You have read the receipt. The transaction finalized 3 days ago. When Mr. Reid accepted the bill of lading from the executor of the estate. He assumed the liability. The chain of custody is closed. The cylinder is now void." He walked forward into the room. No one moved to stop him, they were paralyzed by the sheer, quiet authority of the pronouncement. What happened next was not a fight of strength, but of futile interference, a desperate scramble to control a process that had already ended. As the man in black reached for the cylinder, Carter lunged for a master power switch on the wall, hoping to freeze the data. Edward stepped into the man's path, not to punch, but to physically block, to buy a single second. The man in black simply pushed past him, a motion so effortless it was like moving through smoke. Vargas, with a cry of frustration, swung the heavy fire extinguisher. She did not aim at the man, but at the scanner's main processing unit on the table, a final, violent act of sabotage. The red canister hit the steel table with a deafening crash, spraying a cloud of white powder and severing a thick bundle of cables in a shower of impotent sparks. It changed nothing. The man in black placed a gloved hand on the cylinder's end cap. With a simple, effortless twist that should have been impossible given its earlier resistance, he unscrewed it. It came away in his hand with a sigh of releasing pressure. He appended the cylinder over the steel table. Nothing came out. Not dust, not a parchment scroll, not a single grain of sand or a whiff of ancient air. It was utterly, completely, devastatingly empty. The asset was the obligation, the man in black said, placing the heavy cap softly on the table with a definitive *clink star. The obligation has been transferred. The physical shell is irrelevant. You, Mr. Reid, are now the responsible party. The air left the room. Carter stared at the hollow cylinder, her face a stark mask of shattered ambition, the grand revelation she sought reduced to a simple, empty tube. Vargas looked from the cylinder to Edward, her expression one of pure, uncomprehending numbness. Edward felt the weight settle on him, not a physical thing, but a cold, administrative certainty. They had been fighting for a prize that was never there. He had lost the game before he even knew he was playing. The silence in the laboratory was absolute, broken only by the faint hiss of the damaged equipment and Vargas' shallow, shocked breathing. The man in black stood patiently, a void in the sterile light, waiting for the reality to crystallize. He then produced a sleek, matte black tablet from within his coat. He laid it on the steel table beside the empty cylinder, the gesture funereal. The screen woke, displaying dense blocks of text. A standard non-disclosure agreement. And an asset acknowledgement form. Your signature binds you to procedural confidentiality regarding this and all related matters. Non-compliance invokes predefined sanctions. Edward did not move. His eyes were fixed on the screen, but he was not reading the legalese. One heading, in a slightly larger font, had caught his eye, Appendix B, historical chain of custody for subject asset. He tapped it. The text dissolved and reformed into a list. It was not a short list. It began not with a date, but with a location, Château de la Commanderie, vicinity of Marseille. Then a name, Frère Guillaume, custodian. Then a description, transfer to Galerie d'Espoir, under seal of the preceptor. The next line, Lisbon, warehouse of the Order of Christ. Logged by Clark Alonso. It went on, and on. Ship names changed from sailing vessels to steamers to freighters. City shifted from European ports to those in the New World. Custodians became bankers, then lawyers, then directors of holding companies. The method of conveyance evolved from guarded chests to secured railway cars to climate-controlled maritime containers. But the chain never broke. Not once. Through wars, revolutions, collapses of empires, the line was unbroken. A continuous, documented thread of responsibility stretching across 7 centuries, ending in this basement room, with his name being entered by invisible hands. The artifact had never been the cylinder. The artifact was the chain itself. He pushed the tablet away, the motion slow, deliberate. I need to think. The procedure offers no time for deliberation, the flat voice replied. Acknowledgement is required. It does now, Edward said, meeting the space where the man's face should be. His voice held a new quality, not defiance, but a resumption of his own function. The function of an archivist facing a corrupted record. The man in black stared at him for a long, silent moment. Then, he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not concession, it was a notation. He collected the tablet, the screen winking out. The procedure will pause. It does not forgive. He turned, his coat sweeping the powdered chemical from the floor, and walked out. His operatives fell in behind him. The heavy door sighed shut, followed by the definitive thunk of the lock disengaging. They were not locked in. They were being left with the consequences. The room felt suddenly vast and empty. Carter finally moved, walking stiffly to the table. She picked up the hollow cylinder, peered into its depths, then let it drop from her fingers. It rang dully against the steel. A shell, she whispered, the word thick with a profound, academic disgust. For signature page. And we were fighting over the pen. She looked at Edward, her eyes stripped of their fanatical light, leaving only a cold, clear failure. My life's work, to read the terms. And the terms were just you. Vargas slumped against the wall, sliding down to sit on the floor. So that yes it? He owns you now? Some phantom debt? Edward walked to the cylinder, now just a piece of peculiar scrap metal. He ran a hand along its cold, inert shell. No vibration. No tick. Just dead weight. They control the procedures, he said, more to himself than to them. The silence. The small print in ledgers nobody reads. They fear noise. Public, messy, uncontrollable noise. They called it sanitization. I think they call the opposites contamination. Or oceans of fools. What are you talking about? Vargas asked, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. We do not hide the debt, Edward said. A familiar current was waking in him, the same one that led him to debunk liars and dissect conspiracy theories. It was not hope, it was a colder, more tactical energy. We do not try to outlawyer it. We declare it. To everyone. We contaminate the entire procedure. An hour later, he was in the cool, sound-damped silence of his studio. The closed archive backdrop, a wall of carefully arranged, empty bookshelves, stood behind him. The red recording light on the camera glowed like a single, unwavering eye. On a monitor to his side, he had arranged digital scans, the bill of lading, the close-up photographs of the cross and rose, the stark image of the anachronistic barcode, and finally, the damning, endless list from Appendix B, with the most recent entries highlighted. He took a breath, the kind he took before dissecting a flawed narrative. The camera saw a man who looked tired, who had been in a fight, but whose gaze was sharp and clear. What follows, he began, his voice calm, measured, the voice of someone presenting evidence, is not a theory. It is not a speculation about ancient orders or hidden treasures. It is a document trail. A paper and data ghost. It concerns a single shipment that, according to the paperwork, has been in continuous, documented transit for approximately 700 years. He did not sound like a believer. He sounded like a notary public reading a will aloud in a crowded room. He walked the audience through it, step by sterile step. The curator's to clean death. The port warehouse. The cylinder and its impossible vibration. The men in black and their precise, procedural threats. He showed the symbols, the barcode. He did not say Templars. He said a medieval military order. He did not say secret society. He said a documented custodial lineage. He presented Joan Carter not as a villain, but as an academic with a dangerous specialization. He presented the man in black not as a monster, but as a functionary of a system no one had voted for. He was turning a sacred, secret, terrifying right of control into an administrative case study. A boring one. A complicated one about logistics and contract law stretched across time. Halfway through the recording, his phone, placed face up on the desk, buzzed. A text notification glowed. He glanced at it without breaking his cadence. It was from Vargas, * men came to the ship. 3 of them. Looked at the papers, the log. Did not touch anything. One said a procedure withdrawn. They left. What did you do? * he did not stop. He did not smile. He simply integrated the update. The pressure, it seems, can be rescinded. The procedure, it appears, has loopholes. Noise is one of them. When he finished, he did not issue a call to action. He did not promise more secrets. He simply said, the documents are linked in the description. Draw your own conclusions. Then he ended the recording, uploaded the video, and set it to publish. He tagged it with dry, archival terms, *** logistics anomaly, historical continuity, chain of custody case study. *** he sat back in his chair. In the sudden, hollow quiet of the studio, the deed felt both immense and insignificant. He had not fired a shot or broken a code. He had performed an act of radical, public cataloging. He had broken the chain of silence. ******. A week later, he stood in a quiet, vaulted hall of the museum, in a new wing that was still mostly empty. On a simple stone plinth, lit by a single, focus spot, there was no sculpture, no relic. Under a square of anti-reflective glass lay his printed copy of the original bill of lading, the paper looking absurdly small and frail in the expansive setting. A small plaque beside it read, * documentary anomaly number 001, ongoing. * his phone rang. A number listed as blocked. He answered, bringing the phone to his ear but saying nothing. You have not destroyed anything. It was Joan Carter's voice, stripped of its pedagogical certainty, leaving only a dry, weary intelligence. You have desecrated a ritual. The chain of supply, it was never about moving a physical object. It was a ritual of continuity. A closed loop of witness and silence, meant to keep a specific kind of knowledge, not a fact, but a * potential *, alive and contained. You have turned it into a public meme. A subject for online debate and graduate thesis papers. It is useless now as an instrument of control. You have not seized the weapon. You have published its schematic to the world. And the debt? Edward asked, his eyes on the empty plinth. The debt remains, she said, and he could almost hear the shrug. But its nature has changed. It is no longer a focused obligation on a single party. It is now disseminated. A shadow on the wall for anyone to see. A story among millions of stories. Its power was in its secrecy, its specificity. You have diluted it into the background noise of history. She paused, and for a second, the old, cold curiosity flickered in her tone. It was an elegant solution. Barbaric, but elegant. You changed the rules of a game you did not fully understand. That's the point, Edward said quietly. The call ended. He stood for a long moment, looking at the bill of lading under glass. The real artifact, the true relic of power, had never been the cylinder, or the debt, or even the secret it held. It had been the unbroken, undocumented asterisk path star. The hidden river of custody. And he had mapped that river, named its ports, and published the map. He had not beaten the system. He had simply made its most potent mechanism, secrecy, obsolete for this one particular thing. He had turned a sanctuary into a museum exhibit. He walked out of the museum into the late afternoon. The city's roar was a physical force after the hall's silence. Leaning against a lamppost across the street, wearing a clean but old denim jacket, was Alice Vargas. She watched the traffic for a moment, then looked over at him. "What now?" she asked, her voice carrying over the din of a passing bus. Edward Reid stepped off the curb, into the flow of pedestrians. He did not look back at the museum. "Now," he said, the city's noise swallowing his words even as he spoke them, "we make some noise."